I'm not going to use a press. I'm just going to tap it out. If you don't have something like this that bolts onto it, you can take a, actually I'll just do it the way, I'll just do it this way. You take the bolt, the nut for the flywheel, and you bottom it all the way out on the crank, especially if you're planning on reusing this crank. You don't want to bend any of this, so you bottom it out on the threads. That way it doesn't bend this piece right here. And then you take the size of that socket, the size of that nut, that's 17 millimeter, get a socket for it. Yeah, you're going to damage your socket a little bit. It is what it is. But then you give her some lub taps, so let's do that. And what I mean by lub taps is you're going to have to beat the shit out of it. So you can see I got the crank hanging here on the corner of my bench. You can figure something out. The case, that way I don't have to put the cranks hanging loose. It can be very difficult. Let's see if it's moving. It's starting to move. It's knocking everything off my bench. These can be really hard. Like I said, the YZ250s, when they're virgins, they can be really tough. Woo! Alright, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a cookout. Yeah. I put the... Dude. Alright, I put the oven here on low. Don't want to like toast everything. I still have a rubber hose here and stuff. I don't want to burn any of this stuff. I still have some seals on retain, but it can handle a little bit of heat. It's a motor. They get hot. So I'm just going to let it get nice and warm. And that, again, I'm not looking to toast it. I just want to let it get nice and warm. And that's going to allow the crank to come out of the bearing easier, or the bearing and the crank to come out together. Just get that crank out of there. Hey, buddy, you alive? Oh yeah, there you are. Alright, let's let this crank heat up for a minute. Alright, we got some heat on her. Like I said, I didn't go too crazy with it. I can technically use the case splitter since the crank got stuck on this side. I can use the case splitter to knock her out, but we're just going to continue this route for now since we didn't use the case splitter to split the cases. Now, when you do use a case splitter to split the cases, then you cannot use a case splitter to push out the crank because the crank will be stuck on the other side of the case. Whichever side it sticks on, though, you got to get it out. Oh! She's almost out, guys. Put my knee underneath it to catch it. Everything's falling. Alright, back at it. She's almost out. There it is. As they say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I could have used a case splitter to push this out, or you can beat it. But since I didn't use a case splitter to split the cases, I chose to go this route for you home gamers out there. In case y'all don't have case splitters and you're doing this job. By just using bolts like I showed you, well, now you know how to get the crank out without a case splitter. And you always have to be ready to do this. Either be able to press it out or beat it out, because when you use a case splitter, it will keep the crank on the other case. At that point, it'll have to be either pressed out or beat out like I just beat it out of the other side of the case. So you just have to be ready for that. Alright, once I get it off, ooh, I am dropping everything. Alright, you can see the case, or the threads are in good shape. Nothing got damaged. If we had to reuse this crank, we could, but we're not going to because that bearing is melted on. Oh, she wiggles a little bit now. Guess maybe the heat freed her up. Again, you can see I can hold this crank. You don't want to get it too hot when you put them in the oven. And I can hold this with gloves on. I wouldn't want to hold this barehanded too long. Or even with these gloves, I'm starting to feel the heat come through. But you don't want to melt the seals or anything. You just want to get a little bit of heat in it. A little bit of heat goes a long ways. Alright, before we clean these cases up, I'm going to go ahead and remove the crank seals and the crank bearings. These can also be very difficult to remove on these, and just like earlier, like I mentioned, we are going to have to pound the crap out of it. So unless you have a press, you can use a press, but if you don't have a press, this is how you do it. Oh, and by the way, when I mentioned about using the grill to heat up the cases, you can also use your oven inside your house if your wife's not looking. I like to set it on the lowest temperature I can, like 175 is usually the lowest that most ovens go for. I just knocked the seal out there, by the way. And at 175, you just leave it in there for a few minutes until they get nice and toasty, and then you can pull them out, and you now have heated cases. We will reheat these back up when we go to knock the new crank bearings in, because the aluminum will swell. And I have the crank bearings right now and the crank in the freezer, because that will cause it to contract and become smaller. So with the cold bearing and hot case, they'll go in a lot easier. Alright, let me find the right size socket to knock this thing out. That looks like a good socket, fits right in the hole just fine on the bearing race, so let's give some taps. Woo! She's moving though, she's coming out. They're tough when they're virgins, I'm telling you. These are some of the, these YZ250 two-strokes are some of the toughest. Oh, don't want to drop the camera again. Alright, that bearing's out. Holy. Yeah, these are some of the toughest when they're virgins, man. It's just how they are. To make the other side easier, this side was already a little warm. To make the other side easier, I'm going to go stick that on the grill for a minute, because aluminum expands more than metal when it gets warm. So by heating the whole case up like that with the bearing in it, the aluminum's going to expand more than the metal will, which will loosen some of the tension on this bearing and help it punch out a little easier. So let me go ahead and stick that on the grill for a minute. Oh, by the way, now that the case is nice and loose, I can wiggle out this pin here. So that's good, because we're going to need that out anyway to be able to knock this crank out, or the crank bearing out. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how a little bit of heat loosens up things. And now when you do this, if you're doing it with the whole transmission in, you got to hold the transmission in with your hand. And actually, let me get a better camera angle for you here. Okay, so you want to hold the transmission with your whole hand. Set this side on the bench. Hold the transmission in. You set your socket right there. She's coming. Drop the camera again. Alright, back at it. She's getting there. And dropped it again, but hey, the bearing just came out. If you can't tell, this is a wooden shed, so shop, whatever. Everything vibrates and shakes, but alright. I got that out, and I kept the transmission in. Got the crank bearing out. Now I'm going to go ahead and take both these cases, get them cleaned up so we can start reassembly. I'm going to remove the Yamaha bond on the matting surfaces. Yamaha is usually pretty liberal with the Yamaha bond, so it doesn't take much to get it all out of here. and then I'll spray the cases down with WD-40 and use high pressure, air compressor, high pressure air to blast the WD-40 off, and that usually gets them clean enough for the job that we're doing here. Okay, got them all cleaned off with WD-40 and air pressure, and then when I was done, I hit him with brake cleaner just to get the oil residue off. You see he's got some scratching right here. That was from a piston. Even though the motor's a virgin as far as the bottom end, he did have a, I believe it was a stock piston, come apart on him a while back, and I think it left them lines as the skirt was down there. That's why he ended up having to get a new cylinder for her. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and go get the new crank bearings out of the freezer, and I'm gonna stick one of these back in the oven for a minute to get it nice and toasty. Go get a cold crank bearing and knock it in. All right, we have a brand new Koyo Japanese bearing here. These are what come in them stock. It's the same brand that makes them stock. It's nice and cold right out of the freezer, and the cases are right out of the grill, so shouldn't be that hard. You got to work fast here because they share temperature real quick. See how I did that there? You want to hit this surface all the way around. You don't want to hit this in here. Just hit it all the way around. If the cases are hot, like I said, just, you see I can touch them with these gloves and hold them, and now it's just now starting to burn my hand. So they're nice and warm, but they're not so hot that it's going to hurt the seals. I mean, it probably gets this hot just running. So you want to get them nice and warm and then freeze the bearing, and you can get in just like that. If you don't do that, man, you have to, you saw how hard it was for me to get them out. It's about how hard it is to get them in. So let me go ahead and do the other case now. All right, fresh out of the toaster. Oh, let me get that off there for a second. All right, I'm gonna hold the Kickstarter assembly in. I got it hanging off the bench here because that stuff hangs off the end, but I'm gonna hold that in so it don't fall out while I'm pounding here. Easy as that. Oops, she came out. Little heat makes everything loosen up. All right, so yeah, let's get on to the crank now. All right, have a brand new frozen OEM Yamaha crankshaft. She's nice and frozen. Set her onto the side for a second. It makes it, like I said, it makes it contract, become a little bit smaller. I'm going to heat up the inner race of this bearing with a torch. You want to do circles around it so you don't make a hot spot and burn the bearing, but you want to heat it up so it expands, because you saw earlier how hard it was for me to knock that crank out of the bearings when the bearings were in the case. Well, you can't really knock them in. You just have to get them to slide in, and so this is how you do it. You just heat that up, get it nice until you got to get it pretty warm, and if the crank's frozen, they will slide in by hand. Let's get it nice and toasty here. That should be good enough. Of course, you want to make sure you put the crankshaft in the correct direction. If you put it opposite, once they get to the same temperature, you're going to have fun separating it again, just like I did earlier. You don't want to do that with new cranking bearings. You don't want to put it through that kind of torture. So make sure you get the flywheel side of the crank on the flywheel side and the crank gear, main crank gear on the main crank gear side the first time. Okay, she should just slide right in. There it is. Quick and easy. Easy breezy. Give that about 30 seconds and you won't be able to slide it back out. They're going to equalize in temperature right there, and it's going to be nice and stuck. So now we need to start working on getting some Yamaha bond on these cases. And obviously, I like to put the crank on the same side of the cases as the transmission. So when I go to slide it together, I can have it this, up at an angle, and I don't have to worry about stuff falling out of here. I can just slide it on. So that's why I chose to put the crank first on the same side as the transmission. But let me go ahead and clean these matting surfaces just one more time, or at least double check their cleanliness, and get some Yamaha bond in there, and we're going to put these cases together. They have Honda Bond, Yamaha Bond, and they also have Moto Seal gasket maker. I know AutoZone sells this. It's made by Permatex. It's the same thing as Yamaha Bond or Honda Bond. It looks the same. It smells the same. It works the same. It's usually what I use. The same white junk. It smells like gassy. So let me go ahead and put this on. As I put this Yamaha Bond on, I just use my fingers. And you obviously want to get the whole outside edge of the case to keep all the oil in and stuff. Technically, I know from Yamaha, from factory, they like right here, they only do this inside lip. They're not worried about this outer edge. They only do the inside just to lock the oil in. I like to do all of it for the most part, because when you wash a bike, water can get in between here. If you don't put Yamaha Bond here, it can cause the axle, the swing arm pivot bolt to rust and stuff. So if I got this motor part, I'm just going to seal it all off. It doesn't hurt anything. And yeah, just seal it off. At least around that. Up here where the venting is, you really just have to worry about the outer surface here. This is just venting. You get it around the whole thing. Let's see, like right here, I did both sides because I don't want water getting in the middle where the bolt's at. Same with back here. I did all the way around. The stock only comes like right here across this area. And I know they use a rubber O-ring right here on this side of the case to seal the water passage, but I go ahead and use Yamaha Bond on that too. I'll let Yamaha bond with the rubber seal. It's okay. I just want to guarantee there's no leaks, and I don't want water getting in between and rusting these things out. You see how this one shows a little bit of rust? That's from water. That's from water getting in there. But if you put some Yamaha Bond right around, the water's not going to get in there anymore, or moisture and stuff. So I got these all sealed up. Let me get it, Yamaha Bonded up. Let me go ahead and get it ready to slide the cases together. Same as earlier, you just make circles around it. Just get it nice and toasty. This is another reason why I don't put the seals in, the crank seals, until I have the cases together. On bikes like this, that you can get away with that. Some of your Kawasaki 2-strokes, they have that lip. That's the only way to get the seals in, or from the inside of cases, and you can't do this. But on the YZ250, you can get the seals in from the outside of the cases. So I put the seals in last, just so I can take advantage of being able to heat the bearing up before I slide the cases together. So let me get this nice and toasty, and we're gonna slide them together. Okay, these should go together pretty easily. Got the Yamaha Bond all on that side, ready to go. Double check the transmissions all the way in. Double check that my little pile of parts, like the O-ring, I already put the O-ring in, and these two locating pins here. So we got everything in here that needs to be in here. Let's slide it together while it's nice and toasty. Check that out. See there? Remember how hard them things split? A little bit of heat, and they go together well. Alright, now we got to get the bolts in while the Yamaha Bond's still wet. What I like to do is put all the bolts in and just set them in first, because then you can figure out which ones go in which hole before you thread them in. They should all stick out. Looks like about 10 millimeters or so, maybe 12. They should all stick out evenly, about that much. No matter how long the bolt is, when you slide it in the hole, it should stick out. They should all stick out the even amount. See, that one was too short. And I know this is shiny, so it goes in here. Same with this one. That one, I know it don't go there. Alright, I got all of them in. Now I'm going to just thread them down real quick. Alright, she's all dumped, cleaned out, looking good, spins super freely. Look at that. I let go of my hand. It's still wobbling. Watch this. So she's good. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and put everything back in the clutch cover. First, we're going to do that shifting mod that I was talking about. Okay, you see this spring right here? This spring doesn't really apply. I mean, it's okay for the weekend warrior or the slower guy, but it doesn't really apply enough force to this detent. They call this the detent lever for the shift detent. What happens, you ever notice when you shift your transmission when the bike's off, sometimes you have to roll the bike's back wheel a little bit to get it to actually complete its shift to the next gear. So when you do a shift, this your lever, your foot on the lever doesn't complete the shift. It initiates the shift. What completes the shift is this spring, the spring pressure right here. It'll spin this cam just to the just over the top half of the next gear lobe on this shift on this cam, and it relies on this spring and this roller to complete the shift. When the dogs in the transmission finally line up, then it'll complete the shift. When the spring's too soft, sometimes it gets caught in between gears. It doesn't complete. It gets caught right on top of that ramp and it doesn't complete the shift. But if you can either put a stiffer spring in here or increase the distance of the spring here, and that's what we're going to do. Just use the same spring, but we're going to put it in a different location on this rod here. You'll increase the amount of force that's being pushed down on this lever right here onto the cam. What that allows the transmission to do is, first off, not catch these false neutrals that are a huge pain in the ass and actually end up destroying the transmission if you catch enough of them. And it also allows you to get shifts in quicker. The transmission will actually shift quicker, and that's important when you're coming up to the faces of big jumps and you're trying to sneak a shift in right at the last second, but you just don't want to let off the power for too long. When you make that shift, it because it has more spring pressure, it's going to line the gears, the dogs, and the cogs up quicker. And so it actually speeds up the speed that the transmission is capable of shifting as well. So, you know, this is a really important mod. I don't think there's a race bike out there that uses the stock spring or the stock spring pressure on this. Most pros bikes have a pretty stout spring for the shifting mechanism here, the shift detent. But this is pretty crappy, man. If you look at a lot of the newer bikes and the 4-strokes, they use like a circular spring in here, and it's a much better design, even though they still are undersprung, but it's a better design as far as it doesn't fatigue and wear out. This one can actually fatigue and wear out. If you get too many hours, even if you don't do this mod, just replace this spring. It gets soft, you'll start catching false neutrals everywhere, and you'll even catch the real neutral. What happens, you'll go to shift from first to second gear, and you go to give it gas, and you find that you caught neutral. By increasing the spring pressure here, by either extending where it mounts onto this lever or by putting a stiffer spring in here, you're far less likely to even catch neutral when you don't want to. Now, the reason they don't do this from factory, everyone says, well, the factory has it right. They have their reasons, and the reason being is it does make it harder to find neutral. So you'll be roll into the pit, and you'll go from first and try to find neutral, and a lot of times they'll go past neutral right into second, because this spring pressure, when it initiates the shift, initiates it quick and hard. Once you increase the spring pressure. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to find neutral when you get in the pit. You might end up going to second, and then you have to go back down. Maybe then you'll catch neutral. You'll have to, sometimes you have to search a little bit to actually find neutral once you get in the pit. And that's why they don't send them out the door with stiffer springs like that, because they know that, you know, the average person that's buying these bikes are slow, and they're more concerned about little things like that, you know, pissing them off, than actually truly how the bike performs on the track at a faster rider's level. And so that's why they don't do that. But you know, if you're catching false neutrals, or you're a faster guy, or you just want to get your shifts in quicker, and you don't want to destroy your transmission, you're going to want to do this. Like I said, there's not a race bike out there that they haven't increased this pressure to get these shifts in. They don't want to be catching false neutrals on the face of a triple, I promise you that. And or even during a whole shot, catching a false neutral going from third to fourth or second to third, and completely throwing the whole shot away. So here's how we're going to do this on this bike. This really kind of only works on this bike. There's other ways to do it on some of the other bikes. Like I know on the Hondas, you can actually just take the circular spring out, take one of the two tabs, and give it a bend to give it more force and put it back in, and that works great. On this one, we have to first take this thing off. So I'm gonna pop this spring off right here, and I'm gonna remove this lever. Actually, backtrack that. The first thing I'm gonna do is remove this shifting mechanism right here. Let me grab the tools to do that. All right. if you're careful when you remove this out of here, you can pull out. Oh no, I wasn't careful enough. Yeah, I was going to say you can keep all this together, but that didn't happen here. Okay. Oh, another thing, when you first put the cases together, it's also good to verify that she shifts through all her gears, which I'm doing right now. You can do that just by sliding the shifter rod back in, rod back in here and putting the shifter on it and just cycling through gear. Of course, you got to spin the transmission to do that. As you see, remember what I was mentioning earlier, this completes the shift. So let's say you're in this gear right here. Let me get you a little closer here. Let's say you're in fourth gear right here and you downshift to third, right? Hold on. Your foot will only shift it that far, and it locks, and it sits on top of that cam. I don't know if you can see that in there. Hold on one second, let me clean this thing. All right, sits on top of that cam, and then once this spins, here, let me set this up here. Watch closely right down here. You'll see, once I spin this and hold the other shaft here, it will fall into the next gear. And that's that spring pressure I was talking about. That's what completes the shift. So that's why we want to increase that spring pressure so that it completes the shifts more quicker and with a little bit more force, so that you don't get caught in between gears, because that is what damages the transmission, when you get caught in between the gears too much. Let me go ahead and take this thing out here. All right. And now I'm going to remove that Allen in the center of the shift detent lever here. Okay, I got all this out of the way. I can go ahead and just leave that. Well, no, I want to take this out for now. I'll show you why when we go to put it back together. So now, normally I would like to just drill another hole in here, like further out, increase the leverage. There's nowhere to drill a hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a grinder and grind a slit right over here for this spring to grab onto. And that'll increase the distance between the two and make the spring, essentially the spring will feel stronger and feel stiffer at the shifter lever, which will complete your shifts faster. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll be right back. Alright, what I use is one of these on a Dremel. Has this little very thin small cutting wheel. I mean, you can use anything to figure out. You see the little slit I cut right there underneath. Gotta make sure it's on the bottom side of that, because what we're gonna do is when we connect this spring up, instead of putting it in the hole here, we're gonna reach around and put it in that slit instead of the hole, and that'll hold it in just fine. Trust me, I've been running my bike like that. I probably got 60 or 70 hours on it with this mod, and yeah, she's fine. So you want to make sure you cut it deep enough where the whole spring, the spring sits in the groove, so it can't pop out. And I don't know if you can see it well. There you go. Yeah, you want to make it deep enough where, see where it does take up the width of the spring completely. And that's it. So now let's put it back together. I like to use Loctite on everything. Just a dab of red will do. Don't go crazy with the red, because then you won't be able to get it back off, but just a dab. Because you also don't need this stuff coming off while you're riding the bike. Trust me, you don't want that. Alright, I'll first put this in. Make sure you got the washer on the correct side with the bolt on that side and the washer on the other. Make sure you get it right in here where it's centered out. There it is. Just tighten that by hand. Now I'll go ahead and reattach the spring. Alright, so we have the spring attached. Now I'm going to need to keep this out of the way while I put all that stuff back in. So here's how I'm going to do that. There you go. I use some long needle nose, the pointy long ones, and I just kind of clip it down like that to keep it out of my way for a second, so I can reattach all this stuff. Alright, that's in properly. Spray that with some brake cleaner here. As always, a dab of Loctite. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put this back in. Gotta be careful when you tighten this. Don't go too crazy because you're actually forcing the transmission here. Just get it pretty tight, and with Loctite in it, it's not going to go anywhere. Whew, took me forever to get this thing kind of back together, but let me grab a little pick. All right, let's slide this thing in. These can be tricky sometimes. You get a feel for it after a while. You kind of want the little spring-loaded tabs. You kind of want to push them up, help them in. Oh, it popped back out. Let me pause the video, save you guys some time. All right, gonna try it again. Oh yeah, I see what I got going wrong here. Hold on. Alright, let me try again. There it is. Holy freaking cow. That can be tricky, but you'll get the hang of it. Just keep trying until you get it. Definitely want to make sure you have a pick to help you push them little spring-loaded tabs in. Where'd my Loctite go? There it is. Alright, Loctite this thing in. And I'll tighten these down by hand. Oh, and I can also remove this now too. Alright, there it is. And as you can see, the spring is now yeah, here, let me set the camera up like this. As you can see, the spring is now hooked up to that lip that I grinded into it down here instead of the hole, which, you know, pulls the spring more, which puts more force onto the little wheel that's on the cam. So that's going to help the shifts. And that's the shifting mod right there. So if you watch this video just for